Yo, what up, beautiful people of the internet? Except for you, Steve. You ugly as fuck. Demoghost here with another freaking poll video. This will be the first in a series by series poll where we talk about which game is the most difficult in the series, starting with the classic Street Fighter. I'll be going over briefly the different mechanics that were added or removed from each game that made them a bit more difficult or not. But first, thanks for everyone who voted. You guys make these videos what they are, so yeah, thanks. The classic, and apparently the easiest Street Fighter game to play. This is one of those games that you'll see in arcades everywhere, even to this day. Street Fighter 2 first came out in 1991, and then again in 93 and 94 with Super Street Fighter 2 and Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, and then also randomly in 2017 with Ultra Street Fighter 2. Street Fighter 2 was the first of the series to feature combos, but it wasn't exactly intentional. Arcade cabinets ran on the arcade system board called Capcom Play System, or CPS-1 for short, and was designed to run on the system without combos since there was a worry of combos being too unfair. However, by utilizing a glitch with the CPS-1 system, it was discovered that you could rapid cancel light kick into heavy punch and then cancel into a special. This was called the CPS-1 chain. This glitch was later removed in the more updated CPS-2 systems that the arcade cabinets ran on, but Capcom full-on embraced the combos by including similar ways to chain moves together in future Street Fighter games, and even included bonus points for combos in later versions of Street Fighter 2. Street Fighter 2 was also the first in the series to introduce the ability to play characters other than Ryu or Ken. That's right, Street Fighter 1 didn't let you do that. This forced you to play differently depending on who you're up against. Players had to figure out what the strengths and weaknesses of each character were, which sounds pretty basic by today's standards, but I'm sure this was all very mind-blowing back when this first came out. Other mechanics such as throws work differently than they do these days as well. Nowadays, throws can be teched out of if you're expecting it or just have really quick reflexes. There are also usually huge recovery frames anytime you whiff a throw, leaving you wide open for a big heaping helping of punishment. However, this wasn't the case in Street Fighter 2. There was no option to break throws through techs. Instead, at best, you could hope to tech throws to mitigate some of the damage. This made tick throws all the more difficult to deal with. It also doesn't help that the recovery time for whiffing was nearly non-existent as well. This led to the mentality of throws being cheap in the arcade scene for many years, and also making it a good way to get exiled from your local scene for being a Class A scumbag. Many of the mechanics and additions in Street Fighter 2 have just become standard practices in almost every single fighting game since. While this was revolutionary for its time, nowadays it's a relatively simple game compared to its successors. The most current version of Street Fighter, and the first one of the series, did not have an official arcade release. Street Fighter V was released in February of 2016 in a bare-bones state that left players feeling a little bit cheated. With online barely functioning, key game modes just flat out missing, a drastically shrunken roster of 16, and many bugs and glitches running rampant throughout, the game was immediately given a bad rep. In recent times, however, it seems to have corrected some of these mistakes. On the other hand, it has gone out of its way to try to simplify some mechanics to make the game more approachable for new players. One of the ways that it does this is by removing one-frame links from certain combos that were much more common in its predecessor Street Fighter 4. Links were given a few extra frames to make it much more forgiving when trying to chain moves together to form combos. While some players think this makes the game too easy, others much appreciate the change. Crush counters were also added in 5. If certain attacks land a counter hit, this puts the opponent in a crush counter state. They are sent spiraling backward and have more hits done than your normal counter hit, allowing you to extend into combos you normally wouldn't be able to. This added a whole new layer to the neutral game since you can be heavily punished for making the wrong move or just having poor footsies. Another mechanic added to the game is the V system. The V system is a new mechanic exclusive to 5 that added the V gauge at the bottom of the screen that fills up from taking damage, blocking damage, or using a special move called the V skill unique to each character. The V gauge can be used to do two things, V reversals or V triggers. V reversals only take one gauge and act as a move that knocks your opponent back or down, basically just to get them off you. V-triggers in comparison are much more powerful abilities, but require the V-gauge to be filled completely. V-triggers can be activated by pressing both heavy buttons at the same time. When activated, time freezes for a brief moment, canceling whatever motion you were previously doing, allowing you to do something different or extend certain combos. Kinda like a Roman cancel in Guilty Gear if you've ever played that. Once time resumes, your character either enters a buff state specific to their character, or they'll use a powerful ability such as Rashid's Tornado. These moves are huge tide turners and if used correctly can very easily win you the game. V-triggers are different for each character, but each have huge comeback potential. Street Fighter IV first released in 2008, and again in 2010 with Super Street Fighter IV, and finally in 2014 with Ultra Street Fighter IV. It was the first main game of the series to switch from the 2D pixel graphics to the 3D models. While initially it was met with some hesitation, it quickly became accepted once people got to actually play the game. It also added the best character of the series, Juri. Don't at me. The goal with Street Fighter IV was to go back to the simpler roots of Street Fighter II, instead of continuing the approach of just adding more and more complex mechanics to the game. So Capcom decided to remove the parrying system as well as some other mechanics from 3, and instead replaced it with the new focus attack system. These were charged attacks with super armors that upon hit would send the opponent into a crumpling state, similar to the crush counter in 5. This would allow you to extend combos in interesting ways. While charging a focus attack, the player gains super armor from one attack but loses the armor once the attack is released. To combat this, armor breaking attacks were given to each character that would hit through this armor, dealing increased damage and giving increased hit stun. However, if you could fully charge a focused attack, it became unblockable. This added a lot to the way you approach the neutral, giving you more options to choose from, but also giving you more to worry about. Street Fighter IV was also notorious for its incredibly unforgiving combo links, specifically the one-frame links. Many of the most optimal combos in the game are only pulled off by canceling moves into each other within a one-frame window, which, if you don't know how fast one frame is in a fighting game, it's roughly 1/60th of a second, or 16 milliseconds to be exact. So yeah, pretty fast. The players that put in the work to pull these combos off felt incredibly rewarded for their hard work, while other players felt intimidated by the difficulty of said combos. There are other combos in the game that do not require one-frame links, but they usually don't do as much damage. Additionally, Street Fighter IV added an extra gauge to the bottom of the screen called the Revenge Gauge. It fills up by taking or blocking damage, similarly to the V gauge in Street Fighter V. Once it reaches 50%, you can spend it to use powerful finishers called Ultra Combos, doing increased damage the more your Revenge Gauge is filled up. But you still had the super meter below the Revenge Gauge, which you could use separately for focus attack canceling or EX moves. That's right, we have a tie for first place. Both Street Fighter 1 and Street Fighter 3 received the most votes, but for vastly different reasons. Let's start with the OG. Street Fighter 1 came out in 1987 and was a very bare bones fighting game to say the least. While there are over 10 characters in the game, only 2 of them were playable, and one of them was a reskinned copy of the other. That's right, Ryu and Ken were the only playable characters in the original Street Fighter, and they played exactly the same. Other characters simply served as boss fights for the arcade mode. Now, even in the first version of the game, all of the basic Shotokan was included in the kit of the playable character, and they did massive damage. It was very possible to end the game in 2 to 3 hits with these moves. However, the game itself had wonky controls and animations, making it quite a bit difficult to pull off these moves with any sort of consistency. This wasn't helped with the arcade cabinet's gimmicky pressure-sensitive buttons that didn't work as intended and often broke altogether. There was no such thing as combos in this game, and you had to simply play better footsies than your opponent and hope that you could pull off your special moves more often than them. Meanwhile, in 1996 Japan, or 97 for us American scrubs, Street Fighter III was first released. It later received the Street Fighter II treatment and released 2 other versions of the game in Second Impact and Third Strike. Street Fighter III had taken the mechanics from all its predecessors and added to it. It maintained much of the speed from the Alpha series and threw dashing into the mix. While dashes are a basic feature included in most fighting games these days, every Street Fighter up to this point didn't have it. This definitely had an effect on the way people would approach the game. Additionally, this was the first game in the series to implement throw teching to the point of breaking throws, but the window was incredibly tight, making it very difficult to pull off. Additionally, Street Fighter 3 was the first in the series to introduce EX moves. Instead of using a full bar to pull off epic finishers known as super arts, you could use a portion of that bar to pull off enhanced special moves known as EX specials. This later became staple in every Street Fighter since. Taunts were also implemented into the very mechanics of the game, since taunts gave buffs to your character if you managed to pull them off in a match. Universal overheads were also added to the game, giving every character an easy way to mix up your opponent. Street Fighter 3 was keen on adding every mechanic that it could, and so it added an additional mechanic called the parrying mechanic. Parrying allowed you to completely block a move, negating all damage, even chip, by pressing the forward button while blocking at the right time. This takes exact timing and super fast reflexes to pull off in a high tense match situation, but has obviously led to some of the most hype moments in fighting game history ever. All these mechanics lead to a fast-paced game with so many options and decisions that needed to be made on the fly, making it the most difficult street fighting game ever. With Street Fighter 1, of course. Hey, thanks for watching. Let me know what you think is the most difficult Street Fighter in the comments down below, and if you want to be a part of the next poll video, click the link in the description to vote on what you think is the best fighting game protagonist. I got more videos coming, so if you want to stay up to date with the latest video, hit that sub button and I'll see you in the next one.